How's it going, everybody? This is the Figuring Out Finance podcast, episode 10, chapter 2 of the Rich Dad Poor Dad series. So we have a great episode for you today, or I have a great episode for you today. One of the topics I'm really passionate about is financial literacy, and that's what this whole chapter is about today. So a couple of the topics we're going to go over is why money doesn't solve problems, why you need to be financially literate, what's an asset and what's a liability, what keeps people in their situations, and we'll finish it off with one question about investments. So diving right into it, why teach financial literacy? That's also the name of the chapter. But money doesn't solve problems. So the chapter really starts out with this 1923 story of the richest businessman in America, and 25 years later, they recount where those businessmen are at. Most of them went broke, insane, went to prison, or committed suicide. So that being said, the richest men in America proved that money doesn't solve problems. So it's not about how much you make, it's about how much you keep. So that's why some of these star athletes, they go from making millions in the NFL or professional sports, and they end up sleeping under bridges because they were never taught that financial literacy to be able to handle that amount of money. So that's where I'm starting out, and that's where schools need to be teaching kids instead of, chemistry and algebra. It's like all we need is simple math, and we're going to be a lot better off in the long run. So if you want to be rich, you need to be financially literate. So that's where you build your foundation, and that's where it all starts in the beginning. So one of the references in the book is you're trying to build the Empire State Building on a 6-inch slab that you're going to build your house or your small house on. So, that foundation is not going to be able to support that massive of a business. So that's why the reference is when these athletes are making millions of dollars when they're going from nothing. They don't understand how to manage it. They've never really thought about it. So that's what's missing from school. It's not how to make money, but how to keep it. So we need to learn how to handle it before we make it. And that's where I like to start out at, because that's the point I'm in too. I learned about it all through college when I was living on my own and having to just figure it out. So when I read these books, it kind of solidified what I was already thinking and what I was already doing. And then now I'm able to put that all together and be able to teach it to other people now that I'm really going through it outside of college. So moving on, money only shows the cash flow pattern running in your head. So your money is your financial statement. So without a financial statement, you really don't know where you are in life's financial game. So the cash flow, you're able to see once you write it down in pictures. So the cash flow picture, it's 2 boxes. One's income, one's expenses right underneath, and then you have 2 boxes, assets and liabilities. So once you start listing off what your income is, say it's a job, that would be your income. Your expenses would be the mortgage, credit cards, etc. And then you go below, and what's your assets? So let's just say we have a rental property that brings us in $500 every month. That would be considered an asset. And then on the other side, you would have your mortgage payment, credit card bills, kind of like how we listed in our expenses, and those would be liabilities. So that would be taking money out of your pocket. So all you would do is draw the arrow straight from that liability to the expenses, because that's where it's going, and that's what it is. And then you would bring the assets, since it's putting money in your pocket every month, you're going to draw that arrow right up to the income. And it's going to tack on to what your job is and your salary at your normal job. So it's kind of hard to explain through words, but I encourage you to get the book or just look it up. So going back on that last statement I made, without a financial statement, you really don't know where you are in life's financial game. So that's all that is income minus expenses. What do you have left? How are you, what's your income? Are you buying assets to not be able to have to work? So if you don't know what an asset and a liability is, that's where we need to really dive into. So assets and liabilities. So the rich people acquire assets to be able to produce income for them. And then the poor and middle class acquire liabilities. And that's what keeps them in those two classes and aside from the rich. So people don't know the difference between an asset and a liability because the definition is not based on words. And I'm going to pause there. The definition is not based on words. You could look up in the dictionary what an asset and a liability is, but in the game of life, it doesn't really matter. But because it's based on numbers, and that's where your financial statement really comes into play, because we don't need to know all these fancy definitions. All we need to be able to do is read our income minus expenses. And that's where life's game is going to be played. That's what's going to make you rich. It's not get rich quick. It's understand your financial statement. So that's where I start everything. It doesn't matter if you're house hacking, if you're travel hacking, if you're just living life, you need to be able to understand your finances and the income and the expenses. So track your expenses, and you're going to make life really, really easy on you because you're going to be able to read the numbers and understand where your money is going. And that, my friends, is exactly where I love to talk about. So an asset is something that puts money in your pocket, whether you work or not. So that's going to be a rental property managed by a property management company. That's going to be a dividend stock, something putting money in your pocket where it doesn't matter whether you are working or not. So that is not your job, and that is not your primary house. So a liability is something that takes money out of your pocket. So that is going to be your mortgage on your primary house. That doesn't mean your equity, because your equity is really, you're just paying the bank off from having that loan. So that's what a mortgage is. So that's why your house is not your house is a liability and not an asset like some people think. And you can dive into the book and really check that out. But knowing the difference between an asset and a liability is super important because the assets are going to be what gets you out of a job. It's going to be what helps you retire. It's not going to be your mutual fund that you can touch at 65. It's going to be something that's producing income for you right now. This is how some of these young people are leaving their jobs and they're teaching other people how to do it. It's because they bought assets when they were younger and they aggressively bought assets that put money in their pocket every month, replaced their job. Now they're living a more interesting life rather than a 9-to-5 job. And then liabilities are something that the poor and middle class are acquiring instead of assets. So that's your rent payment, your credit card bills, car loans. Car loans are a big one, especially for kids coming out of college where they think they need this super nice, expensive car, and they take on this huge car loan that's like $300 to $400 a month. And I've seen it with my own friends too. It's like, man, and they just try to argue it to death saying, oh, well, it's actually a good investment because it's going to stay out of the shop. I can take it here. But when they start adding up their rent and their payments, they're going to be underwater or breaking even every month. And that's going to keep them in the middle class and not be able to save money for the bigger things, or in this case, to buy assets. So that brings us to the next topic of what keeps people in their situations. The fear of being different prevents most people from finding new ways to solve their problems. So being different, reading books, listening to podcasts, not listening to rap music every time you go to the gym. Turn on a different podcast that you're able to listen to and learn from. It doesn't have to be 24/7, but you're able to listen to something different that's expanding your mind and you're learning from. And that being different is going to separate you from the crowd. That's how I was, because I started reading books. And then as soon as I was reading probably 20 to 30 books in 1 year, I was going to college and thinking, why am I here? Why am I learning this marketing class where this guy is just yelling the word marketing, marketing, marketing? Like, all I'm doing is learning a definition here and not getting real skills. I just read a book and I learned more than I did in probably 4 years of college and all through high school. So do something different and you're going to get different. So going back to that quote, the fear of being different prevents most people from finding new ways to solve their problems. And what solves money problems is not more money, it's intelligence. So what I just talked about is the same thing. That intelligence is going to be what you're getting from reading those books, listening to the podcasts, going out to networking events, talking to really smart people, because you're going to get a lot of ideas from a lot of different people who have done different things. And that way you're able to understand the assets and liabilities, what you want to do in life, and how to get ahead, rather than somebody who's going to just be listening to rap music, have no financial education coming out of school. So going back to it, understand where your money is going by looking at your cash flow chart. So again, I really encourage you to Google it, look up Rich Dad Poor Dad cash flow chart, and you're going to be able to draw that on a simple piece of paper, list your assets and liabilities, your income and your expenses, and you're going to be able to see that. So that's something that I would love to help people out with. If we could just sit down, write that out, because all you really need is a picture on where your money is going, and then we can dive into the numbers once you understand that picture. Because not looking at those numbers and at that picture, if you're scared of it, the numbers are only going to compound and delay the inevitable problem of being in debt and being underwater. So understanding those numbers and those pictures from the start, that's going to help you, even though it's going to be a little scary because maybe you're doing something wrong. Maybe I am too, but I look at the numbers every single month and I'm tracking it every time I spend something, which is a little annoying at times, but I'm able to know where I'm at and know, okay, this is the number I have to get to replace my income. And that is a lot lower than I thought it was. And especially if you're house hacking, going after that biggest number, your rent or your mortgage, you're going to be able to understand the numbers. And that's where I'm going to finish that part at. So, like I talked about a little bit ago, find the people who are doing well in life and not the ones who just look like it. So, what I'm referencing here is keeping up with the Joneses. So, you maybe have heard about that, but to explain what that means, the people who are doing well in life have bought those assets. They're retired, they're doing really well. They probably retired a little bit early, have a happy marriage. Life is doing pretty well for them. They get to do some cool things, and you have to stay away from the people who just look like it. So, being able to ask the question of that family who owns the really big house and the really nice cars, making a lot of money, you always have to be wary because they might be making a lot of money, but they're also spending a lot of money. So being able to understand the difference of just trying to keep up with the family next door could be putting you in debt versus the people who lived below their means for a long time, bought a lot of assets, and now they're living a really good life because they made those decisions early on. They understand their financial statement. So going back to the houses, if you're a homeowner who's an employee, your working efforts are going to look a lot like this. And this is going to explain why the assets are so important. Because, as I said, a homeowner who is an employee, your work life and your working efforts are going to look like this. You work for your company, which makes your boss rich. You work for the government. The government takes money from your check as a tax. And then you work for the bank, paying your mortgage and your credit card payments. So letting that sink in for a second and trying to pause. So you work for the company. That's your job. Yes, they're paying you a salary, but you're making your boss really rich by working for him or her. And then the government, the only things in life that are guaranteed are death and taxes. So the government is taking that money from your check as a tax every single time you get paid. And then you work for the bank. So paying that mortgage and your credit card payments. So working for the bank, you just brought that primary house and now you have a mortgage. That mortgage is being paid from your checking account. That money isn't going from your checking account to the bank back to your checking account. It's staying with the bank because they own your house. So that's why your house is a liability. So you can start to understand why the house is not an asset, because if you follow the simple description of an asset, it's not putting money in your pocket every single month. So that's the main takeaway from this. And then to finish up, an investment is not risky for the financially literate. So I just went through this the other day explaining to someone about the flip that I'm doing. So I understand the numbers. I've talked about it with an agent. I've run it by the hard money lender who's done the underwriting on the house. And here's the numbers, and I can look at it on a piece of paper. If I buy the house for this price, I'll be able to put this much into it and sell it for around this money range and make about $10,000 to $20,000 off of it. So that's an investment where I can read the financial statement. And this person said, well, that seems like a scam. I'm like, what do you mean? They're like, well, making that much money off of it, that's definitely a scam. It's not if you can read the numbers. So if you're financially literate and can be able to read those numbers, talk with the smart people who do this stuff every day, that's not really a scary decision when you put it all together like that. So hopefully everybody took something away from this podcast. Again, that's chapter 2 in the Rich Dad, Poor Dad series. There's still a couple more episodes coming out, or about as I reread this book for the second time. So if you're still listening by this point, go check out my other episodes on the Figuring It Out Finance podcast. Go check out figuringitoutfinance.com, where I have some blogs where I dive into things a little bit simpler, and then check me out on the socials on TikTok and Instagram. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on the Figuring Out Finance podcast.